All right, thank you. First up on the agenda is to consider and act upon the minutes from the regular meeting of July 11th, 2018. See them attached. Did you all get a copy of those?
Don't remember seeing them in the packet.
I don't remember either. You want to table until next one?
Sure. Is that a motion?
Motion to table?
A second? Postpone to a date certain the next meeting?
Sure.
Sorry?
Yeah, motion to postpone to the next meeting.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Shall you just mark that down, that we're going to need a copy of the minutes going forward with that? All right, next up, one of my favorite events here, recognition of Gustave Whitehead's 117th first in flight anniversary, where he flew for the first time here in Fairfield. And we have Mr. Andy Koch here to fill us in a little bit on that. Mr. Koch, would you come up to the podium and tell us a little bit about Mr. Whitehead, but also about your involvement in it, please?
Okay, thank you. Well, Mr. Whitehead flew in 1901 on August 14th, 2 years before the Wright brothers. And people often say, why didn't he get credit for doing this? Well, one of the problems is that our National Museum, the Smithsonian, has a contract with the Wright brothers that forbids the Smithsonian from ever saying anyone flew before the Wright brothers.
Mr. Koch?
Yes, sir.
If you'd speak to the board.
Oh, right.
There's a microphone right there, which is closer to your voice. There's a
Okay.
camera over there that'll pick you up, so the
Okay.
folks at home will get a better view of you.
Okay, thanks.
With our apologies to the folks that are here.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, again, in repeating this, Gustave Whitehead flew 117 years ago, right here in Fairfield. We believe he took off from Turney Road and flew down toward the skate park and landed over in the region of Jennings Beach. And so we celebrate this every year. I've been doing it for the last 32 years. I first learned about Gustave Whitehead from Bill O'Dwyer. And Bill O'Dwyer was an Air Force pilot, and he gave a lecture at the History Museum in Fairfield back about 40 years ago. And I attended that lecture, and I heard people in the audience say, my grandmother helped sew the wings for Whitehead's plane. My grandfather saw Whitehead fly. There were so many people in the audience, they were in their 70s and 80s and even 90s, who were there and were talking about what they knew about Whitehead. So that convinced me that Gustave Whitehead flew. I said to Bill O'Dwyer, after he gave his lecture about Whitehead, that I could probably build that plane and fly it, because I was teaching people to fly hang gliders off Sturgis Hill out in back of Roger Ludlow High School. And he said, boy, if you could do that, it would help the cause. And so I mentioned it to Morgan Kaolian, the airport manager. He introduced me to Kay Williams, the owner of Captain's Cove Seaport, and Kay Williams sponsored me. He built me a 2-car garage at Captain's Cove and gave me a $10,000 budget. And I started working on the airplane all by myself. And as the weeks rolled by, all these older men would come walking in and say, hey, I'd like to help you because I remember the story about Whitehead. So that was wonderful. I had about a half a dozen guys that were super. The best one was a man named Bill Wargo, who was an industrial arts teacher at Bullard Havens Technical School, and he was also a champion model airplane builder. So he was just the kind of guy I needed to help build a plane. So we built the plane. It took us about a year and a half. Brought it out to Bridgeport Airport, and I just started taxiing, and the thing leaped off the ground. And I flew more than the length of this room just by accident, just because I was running into the wind and a little gust came up. And after a couple of weeks, we just continued working on the plane, tuning it up a little bit, and I finally got to fly it on December 28th in 1986. I flew it for the length of a football field until I ran into Wayne Ratzenberger, the head photographer for the Connecticut Post, Bridgeport Post at the time. And anyway, we had a pretty good flight, and then we took a trip to the hospital and patched him back up, and we were still friends after that. So that's my main involvement in Gustave Whitehead. I believe he flew. The replica of his plane flew so easily for me, and There've been about 5 books written about Whitehead already. In fact, recently, the Bible of Aviation, a journal called Jane's All the World's Aircraft, has accepted Whitehead as the first to fly over the Wright brothers. And so I think that's a pretty important point. So I'm going to continue doing this. I'm going to pass all this on to my stepson and my grandson, who's 15. My stepson's 24, and they want to keep on flying too. So we're going to keep this story alive, and that's it.
Andy, thank you. Now, the anniversary date was yesterday, August 14th.
Correct.
So that's 17 years from that point.
That's right.
There are several books out there, one by John Brown,
Yes.
one by Susan Brinkman,
Yes.
that go in a lot more detail and provide support for that. But for me, simplistically, there was a newspaper article written back of the day
Yes.
that covered the flight, that quoted a number of people of very reputable sources reporting the flight. And that flight was actually reported and duplicated in other reports all around the world.
That's correct.
Recognizing that. And I guess importantly, there wasn't anybody that was quoted as being there and saying he didn't fly.
Mhm. True.
I think the challenge is that there wasn't a photograph taken of the plane in flight, which some folks say, well, there's no pictures, so you can't prove it. And the argument is, obviously, there wasn't a picture of George Washington crossing the Delaware either, but he still did.
But I believe there was a picture. I believe the picture that appeared in the Bridgeport Herald was a lithograph, but the lithograph was made from a photograph because the photograph was not that clear. He flew in the wee hours of the morning. But that picture of the airplane is so accurate that no artist is just going to draw a quick sketch of Whitehead in flight and make it as accurate as that was. Also, in 1906, there was a show, the Aero Club of America in New York. And at that show, Whitehead had some pictures on the wall. And one of the pictures, according to Scientific American, was a picture of Whitehead in flight. So somewhere there was a picture, and the Wright brothers were at that same exhibit. And I never heard that they ever complained or said that this wasn't true. We didn't hear about the Wright brothers complaining anything until Orville's last will and testament, which was around 1946. And at that time, the lawyer friends of not Wilbur and Orville Wright, came up with this great contract that forbids the Smithsonian from ever saying anyone flew. So that's a heck of a deal. But anyway, we're happy to be here, and thank you for recognizing Whitehead.
All right, thank you. Any comments from the board?
I've been following this story since I was a kid, and it's absolutely fascinating. It seems like all the evidence is stacked up in favor of Whitehead, and the more time which goes on, the more people seem to buy in. And if we could just figure out a way to get the National Archives and the Smithsonian to study it, I think it would add a tremendous amount of
Well, I think so
credibility.
too. It would be nice if they would, but they would like the Pope to have been there with a video camera, and that didn't happen. So I don't know that the Smithsonian is ever going to recognize Whitehead. Someone's going to have to find a picture, and at one time I thought we had something. A friend of mine said he saw a sea captain's journal, and Whitehead was a sailor. And so in this sea captain's journal was a picture of Whitehead flying and a description of the flight by this sea captain. And we tried to find and locate this sea captain's journal. The people who had owned the house where the journal was located had moved to California. Doc Gunther tried to get in touch with them, and we did everything we could, but they said they didn't know where this journal was. It was a whole series of leather-bound journals. And the sea captain was supposed to be a man by the name of Beckwith Brown. Now, recently, that name came up somewhere, maybe in something that John Brown found, about a Beckwith Brown who was a sailor in New York area. So there may be something. If we could ever find sea captain journals, sea captain wouldn't lie in their journals, a leather-bound journal handwritten by the sea captain with a photograph. That might help.
I would also like to, I mean, you brought up two names, which Doc Gunther
Yes.
and Kay Williams, who were institutions in our community for their entire lives, pretty
Yes.
much. And so much got done because of the efforts they put in. Seeing you carry on that legacy and pass it on, and I'm one of the guys who remembers, and I used to meet with Doc Gunther once a month to go over his. He's the one who found the oyster map of the Penfield Lighthouse from like 16 something of it being a Bridgeport land, and he had that institutional knowledge in there. So I appreciate you continuing that legacy, and I always smile comes to my face when I hear their names brought up.
Thank you.
Mr. Bateson?
Yeah, Mr. Koch, it's a pleasure. Every year when you come before us and do this, I enjoy hearing about it. I remember when the issue first came up years ago, I remember my first thought was, it would be nice to believe this, that it actually happened. But over the years, everything you put together, it's convincing. I believe it. And I think your perseverance and tenacity, it will prevail eventually. History always comes out in the end, the truth.
Yes.
So keep it up. We believe you. I think it's going to happen.
Well, thank you very much. I would like to just finish by saying I met the woman who wrote the first book about Gustave Whitehead. Her name was Stella Randolph, and she wrote this book in 1934. She started and published it in 1937. And I met her in a nursing home in Wilmington, North Carolina, of all places. And I spent a couple of weekends there talking with her, and she gave me a bunch of books and pictures and letters that she had written and received from people who saw Whitehead fly. So she convinced me also that Whitehead flew first. So I think he'll get credit one day. I'm going to keep at it.
Please do.
Thanks a lot.
Andy, thank you. And don't go away. But Walter, the Fairfield Museum also did a big event on Saturday about this. Could you come up and fill us in a little bit on that?
Sure. So on Saturday, we had...
If you could just please introduce yourself
Oh,
to
I'm
the folks
sorry.
at home.
My name is Walt Mattis. I work at the Fairfield Museum in the Education Department. So on Saturday, we had the Fairfield Fly-In, which is a event we've held for the last 3 years that celebrates Gustave Whitehead's flight as a repository of a lot of information about that flight and his history. We're a resource for a lot of people to come and do research. So we celebrate by having the fly-in. We have Hobbytown comes and brings some RC aircraft and flies those. We had the Connecticut Yankee Plastic Modelers group here, as well as the Fairfield Flyers. So it was a wonderful opportunity to share this history with both adults but also young people, for a young chance for them to learn a little bit and maybe follow in Gustave Whitehead's footsteps and go into aviation themselves.
I think that's great. I think that's one of the things that for me, if we can inspire some young Fairfield students to realize that they can be innovators at this level, that's just fabulous. And this is a great example to leave for our children to follow it as part of that. So I think that's
Wonderful. Thank you
great.
very
And
much.
thank you for
Appreciate
everything
that.
the museum's doing along
Thank
that
you.
line. Mr. Koch, if you'd come back, we've got a proclamation for you. And I think you've covered a lot of this in your comments, but we didn't want to let you go without recognizing that the town has declared August 14th, yesterday, 2018, as Gustave Whitehead Day, and wanted to give you this proclamation so you can have that.
Thank you very much, man.
All right? Thank you.
Thanks, Mr.
Gentlemen,
Koch.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Back from our high-flying adventures, we're back on the agenda. First off, we have some resignations from the Parking Authority. Henry Achiron, Democrat, 98 Hunter Road, for a term of 11/16 to 11/21, and his resignation date was July 27th, 2018. And from the Water Pollution Control Authority, Christopher Tymniak, Republican, 543 Old Mill Road, for a term of 11/15 to 11/19. And that, Chris, has been the Selectmen's, Board of Selectmen's representative on the WPCA for his term through August 15th. Then moving on to appointments. These are for information only, but the Economic Development Commission, Rishi Narang, Republican, 50 Stone Ridge Way, for a term of 11/13 to 11/18. And this is to fill a vacancy created by Maureen Abrahamson's resignation, and the appointment date was July 10th, 2018. To the Parking Authority, Mr. Robert Gorman, Democrat, 225 Sturgis Road, for a term of 11/16 to 11/21, and this is to fill the vacancy created by Mr. Achiron's resignation. And the Water Pollution Control Authority, Mr. Edward Bateson, Republican, 2195 North Street, for a term of 11/15 to 11/19, and Mr. Bateson is now becoming the Board of Selectmen representative on the Water Pollution Control Authority. Next up, from the Chief of Police. This requires both Board of Finance and RTM approval. This is to hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution as recommended by the Chief of Police. Whereas the Fairfield Police Department has completed a 2-year trial deployment of 12 body-worn cameras, and their use and functionality has been well received by the officers who participated in the test program. And whereas Public Acts 15-4 and 17-225 has authorized the State of Connecticut Office of Policy and Management, otherwise known as OPM, to reimburse municipalities for 100% of the costs associated with the purchase of body-worn cameras, in-car video, and related equipment and storage. And whereas it is the best interest of the town of Fairfield to expend $749,724 to purchase body-worn cameras, in-car video, and related equipment and storage for the Fairfield Police Department, $742,224 of said purchase cost to be funded by the body-worn recording equipment BWRE replacement grant as administered by OPM, and $7,500 to be funded by a rebate from the vendor. Now therefore, it is resolved that Michael C. Tetreault, First Selectman, be and hereby is authorized to accept in the name and on behalf of the town of Fairfield a $742,224 body-worn recording equipment reimbursement grant from the Office of Policy and Management, and further resolved that the First Selectman is hereby authorized on behalf of the town of Fairfield to sign and execute any and all necessary documents to secure said grant, and further resolved that $749,000 is hereby appropriated to fund, $749,724 appropriated to fund said purchases. May I have a motion to accept?
Make a motion.
A second.
Second.
Just to be clear to my associates on the board, we can talk through, as part of kind of our approach going forward, I'd like to consider items like this, but potentially not vote on them all at the same meeting, so we have time to consider it, potentially ask some other questions, and come back at our next meeting and vote on this. I'm not suggesting we can't vote on it today, but I don't want us to feel under pressure to vote on it today. With that, Chief McNamara, would you please come us and fill us in on this? And I realize that there's a couple of parts of this that are different than our normal grant, both in terms of how the process works, how the application works, when we fund this versus when we know about the grant. Can you kind of step us through all of that?
Sure. I think what you just read is a pretty good overall summary of it, but just kind of to give you the flavor of law enforcement and public safety, is we're all aware the trend towards adopting new innovative technology is certainly ever increasing in law enforcement. In-car cameras have been a staple in most police departments for probably 10 to 15 years. And body cameras, body-worn cameras have obviously entered the fray. We, 2 years ago, as was mentioned, did a test study on the use of body cameras. We received and allocated funding for 12 body cameras. This is kind of like a test case for the town of Fairfield. And it has been well received. And we're looking at options for body cameras, but not only that, but recognizing that in-car cameras, we are behind the curve. We do not have in-car cameras in any of our vehicles, while the majority of law enforcement agencies throughout the country, and just kind of in my knowledge of it, there's certainly some that don't as well, but we certainly do not have in-car cameras. The state has, over the last several years, tried to embrace public safety reforms and to address some of the concerns that some of the high-profile incidents that occur around the country have raised in people's lives, and have looked towards ways to address that. One of the ways is through a myriad of law enforcement changes, but in addition to that, funding body cameras for police departments. I believe a year ago or 2 years ago, they implemented a program to fund body cameras at 100% reimbursement. However, the stipulations in that reimbursement were fairly strict, meaning that every police officer in the department, if you accepted any money for the grant, every police officer in a department would have to have a body camera. And then there were certain guidelines and restrictions that they put on it. I'm not prepared to discuss what those were, but we evaluated it at that point and realized that the restrictions that they implemented, and not only our department, but other departments as well, made it not likely or something we should not embrace. This year, and I say this year, closing out in the end of June, or June 1st was the deadline, they initiated another opportunity for funding. And the debate was whether or not that was actual funding or not, given the condition that the state's finances have been in. And what we have found out was, at the time, that funding is there, that stream of funding exists, that opportunity to get 100% reimbursement for police departments is there and was there. So we started this process. And in all fairness, I fully agree with you, and I understand the fact that you want to digest this and have an opportunity to look through it and ask questions, and some of them we may not be able to answer at this point. But the time frame was very short for us as well. And we looked at it as twofold. Number one, this funding opportunity included in-car cameras. The prior one did not. So what this allows us to do, if you have never had in-car cameras, and we fit that bill, you have an opportunity to get full reimbursement for in-car cameras. If we had in-car cameras, we wouldn't have the opportunity to fund it. That we're not qualified for that. But we are qualified for the in-car cameras. And that is, obviously, as I said before, we're behind the curve when it comes to in-car cameras. And so we seized it as an opportunity, not only to get in-car cameras, but in addition to that, the body cameras. So we met with a vendor. That vendor has been contracted by the state police to do all of their body cameras. And so that's kind of where you are today. We've put forth that proposal. It's a significant amount of money. It is, our understanding is that it is 100% reimbursable, and there's some information in there that goes towards that background. But that kind of gives a summary of it, and that gives a reason for the time frame the way that it is. I mean, obviously, these are important discussions to have when you're talking about that significant amount of money, but understand the reason for the time frame is nothing more than discussions we had with OPM as well as other police departments that said that funding is there and the opportunity was limited to apply. So that's why you have it in front of you.
Okay. All right, any questions from the board to kick things off? If not, I've got a couple.
You can start.
First off, everything I've heard about body cameras, there's a page in here that breaks out the money in terms of what it goes for. Of the 700 grand, how much is for body cameras, how much is for in-car videos?
I'm going to ask the deputy chief, who put forth a lot of effort in that, to maybe break that down a little better for you. So we'll tag team it.
Chris Liddy, Deputy Police Chief. It was approximately 470,000 of the 700.
Chris, is that broken out in the packet here somewhere? Or is there something we can look at that shows that?
OPM.
It is broken out in the grant itself.
Down page 3.
Yeah, I'm looking at part 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah, but you would have to add several columns to come up with that total in-car package.
This thing.
It's in the third page. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Fourth page.
On page 4 of 9 here.
No, 1, 2 from the top.
No.
In the 20s.
No.
It is spelled out here.
Start at the beginning. There you go.
Okay, thank you.
One more page over.
One more page over.
Got it?
That's what you're looking for.
Yeah. So of the $740,000 roughly, how much is for in-car, how much is for body cameras, and how much is for other stuff?
Approximately 470 is in-car camera.
Okay.
About 300, low 300 is the body cams itself and the clips and the things that support that.
Mhm.
And then the rest is installation, training, and the storage involved.
Storage, you mean media storage?
Correct.
Do we have the servers for that?
It is part of the grant, and one unique, well, there's several unique things about this grant, but one of them is that OPM would only pay for 1 year of storage. So those departments that have opted for cloud-based solutions, they have reoccurring costs in their future. We opted to take them up on the opportunity to spec out the servers so that our solution would be paid for moving forward as long as our servers stay healthy.
If I might follow on Ed's comment, what I've heard in the past, as it's been described to me, the cameras are kind of like the razors, and the storage is like the razor blades, and that's where all the cost is over time. So when the cloud-based solution was always that you kept getting more and more storage, and you kept having to buy more, so that that kept your ongoing costs. By buying the servers, that sounds like a good solution. The question then is raised is two things. How long do we keep the data for? Because I've heard that's been an ongoing discussion. And then how do we know we're buying enough? Because we're going to load 100 officers up with these. And they're going to have them on. They turn them on and off at their discretion. So we're not sure how much space each officer is going to need per year, and how many years are we going to store that for? So give us some background as to how that was developed.
In working with the vendor that's familiar with how much usage that these particular units get on an average basis, we spec'd out 160 terabytes on these servers. The retention scheme would be 90 days for the vast bulk of all the media, which would be erased automatically at the 90-day mark. Those videos that the officer tagged after the fact as relevant, pertinent, or administratively, we did the same thing, they would be saved indefinitely.
How often does that happen?
It's hard to say. An entire shift could go through without a single relevant video meaning anything. It would just be things that are destined for court, and then the destruction of that video would be at the hands of the court, just like any other evidence. So the case is disposed of. They may say a year down the line, you can get rid of all evidence associated with this case. So we feel that the long-term storage is not a big issue, and that 160 terabytes is way more than enough to cover 80 body cameras and 60 in-car video systems.
Now, we use this grant, we buy all the hardware we need, cameras, in-car video, servers. What's the life cycle of those components, and when we're on the hook for buying new ones?
The first point of failure is going to be the body cameras. Historically, that's what we're learning. Our estimate, in year 4, we can probably begin to see a 15% failure rate on those. They run, I think, $799 a piece in this grant. It's my belief that we will have enough in reserve to cover year 4, but we were likely to see a 15 or 20% failure rate every year moving forward. So I would recommend basically a 1/3 replacement rate at that particular time. Now remember, we have a pilot program that we're we're purchased storage in the cloud for. That's $15,000 annually. So I believe that $15,000 will cover the body cam replacement. The servers are likely to fail or could fail at the 7-year mark. That's at the $77,000 level. You can fix servers or replace different components, but assuming 100% failure, we feel that would have to be replaced at the 7-year mark. So the 10-year analysis of this, given the fact that we do away with the cloud storage, still shows a cost savings over the 10-year period.
The biggest cost is the video cameras in the cars. You didn't talk about their life cycle in terms of what takes place.
And we turn to the state police on that, who happens to have not the same model, but the same vendor. And the vast majority of their in-car cameras are still functioning at the 10-year mark today. The only point of failure with them, because they're stationary units, would be a car crash or when we transfer the equipment when that car is decommissioned. So we think we get a far better longevity with the in-car cameras than the body cams that are open to environment.
Okay, because we're buying new police cars every year, so we can transfer the cameras to the new car.
Absolutely.
We don't lose at that point.
Much the same as we do radar units and radio consoles and things of that nature.
Okay, any in-house equipment we have to buy so we can access these videos and use them as evidence or review them if need be by the police, by yourselves?
No, the grant is pretty inclusive. There are no reoccurring software upgrades are included. There may be an unknown software upgrade 7 years down the road, but as long as the servers stay healthy, there's nothing that we would owe the vendor after year one.
It's my understanding this grant was a little bit different than our typical grant, so that we in fact have to spend the $700,000 before we know if we're approved for the grant.
Very unusual that they crafted this grant. I've never seen one in this manner. To apply for it, you have to give them the grant application and a cashed check at that point in time. And then it goes before the bond commission, and the bond commission authorizes it. Now, a couple important points to make. We have already shown this grant to the OPM, and they have approved that amount short of $7,500. Of that amount, the vendor agreed. It was a training item that was not included in the grant. The vendor would return that to us. To date, there are 21 agencies that have taken advantage of this grant, and OPM, and I'm sorry, the bonding commission is 100% funded every single one of them and not made alterations. We are in the same position right now as the city of Hartford, who approved theirs on June 27th and are going about it the same way. To add one other thing, Mr. Mayor and Stanton Lesser, Attorney Lesser, have crafted an agreement where the money could be put into an escrow account with no risk, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Mayor, and no equipment would be purchased until such time that a check is delivered to the town of Fairfield in that amount.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the board?
Yeah, to you guys, I always thought we did already had cameras, department-wide. Gary, this is a lot of money going forward. I mean, every year, the Board of Finance, and we sit down our budgets, I imagine in 3 years, we're going to start seeing equipment replacement for this program if
Well, I think Chris said for 4 years, we're good.
4 years, but then, we're going to
Year
start seeing
five,
this
yes.
bleeding into capital. Is this something you guys are prepared to support? Is this where your industry's going? Is this it? I mean, it sounds like we're behind the curve, but every once in a while I read headlines where departments are considering. This is your industry. Is this where policing's going?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think the risk we run is that the longer we're not in the game, especially with in-car cameras, and I use them as an example just because they've been around for a long time. The risk we run is why not? And on a daily basis, having in-car cameras, does it really matter? No, it doesn't necessarily matter. But if a significant event were to occur, and we are that far behind the curve when it comes to technology and the ability to document actions of pursuits or whatever, I think we start to run the risk of why are we not moving forward with video. So I think that the industry is going in that direction. I think that These are important discussions to have, though. You're absolutely right. That this is a lot of money, and it's a lot of investment in the town, and it's certainly
Going
not-
forward, too.
Sure, it
I
could be.
mean, we're investing, this is gonna be $1 million asset to the police department that we're gonna have to keep up and running.
Sure.
Replace, maintain. This is like, I'm viewing this, what did we do for, just do a phone system?
Yes.
800,000 for the town, right? I mean, that's up there with this, and that was drawing brimstone and fire from the Board of Finance. So I see this as, this is a significant capital investment in a new technology. I just want to make sure that from your point of view, you're the experts in this, that this is it. This is the medium we're going to need going forward. I mean, when we invest in software for the town, all of a sudden, 10 years later, it's like, that's not compatible anymore. You have to replace your whole system. I just want to make sure that you guys are on top of this, knowing that this is it. This is the industry standard. You know, in 10 years, the new cameras are going to be compatible with our servers, that we don't, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think that the challenge, I agree 100% with what you're saying. I think the challenge is, I think 10 years, you know, the way technology moves, in 10 years, everything is outdated and changed and.
Right, so if I'm looking at
But in-
700 now, am I going to be looking at another $1 million to replace this system in 10 years?
Right, or we're getting into it for the first time in 10 years, and it's even more at that, because we're not replacing partials, we're not, I think, what I heard Chris say, we're talking about 700 grand, if I can use rough numbers. A little over half of that is for the in-car equipment, and that has at least a 10-year life, based on what Deputy Chief Liddy is seeing out there. We will have to start replacing body cameras, which are smaller and probably get more wear and tear because they're on the officers. Even if they're not being used, they're getting moved with the officers and everything else. So we'll have to start replacing those. You think we have at least some money in the budget, because we'll stop funding the in-cloud service that we're doing for our beta test now. How many cameras are we beta testing now?
12.
12? But we can stop paying for the $15,000 a year in cloud storage for that. And we can use that $15,000 that's already in the budget to help start to build replacement for these. And then it's a question of how many cameras, body cameras, fail per year. So of the 3 components, there's the in-car component that seems to have a 10-year or longer life, but let's say 10 years for right now. The cameras that start to fail in how many years?
3 to 4.
3.
3 to 4. So we'll have to start replacement there, though we'll have to, if we're kind of setting up a cliff, where how many cameras are we buying as part of this?
80.
Okay,
80
so we'll
and
have to
60.
look at buying 80 cameras in 3 to 4 years. And then the servers, how long do servers last? I think those are
You estimate around
4 to
5.
5 years, maybe? And maybe because this is security-related and critical, we may need to replace those on a shorter life cycle than a longer life cycle.
You guys already have your own server?
We have a variety of different servers for different reasons, but
Okay.
not.
But no, they've got to buy a server on this. And Bob, if you're going to talk, you have to, Mr. Mayor, if you're going to talk, you have to come up to the mic,
Yes,
please.
very briefly on servers. The servers are solid-state device technology, which is Newton's technology. These servers are, I think, cost $77,000. It'll have at least a 7-year life. When it needs to be replaced, like all new technology that matures, price will actually be less. Servers.
Go ahead, Chris.
Does the town bond for, like, IT upgrades? Will we bond for an item which lasts 4 years?
No, this is free.
Walk me through the free comment.
Well, we're going to spend $749,000. The vendor's going to give us $7,500 back, and the state's going to give us $742,250 back.
So the state's gonna bond for,
Right, the state's bonding, yes.
The
yes.
state's
They used the
bonding.
word bonding earlier,
Yeah.
yes,
All
yes,
right,
I
so
understand
this-
the confusion.
so
Yeah.
the
So
state's gonna
basically, yeah.
bond for an item which is 4 years old, lasts for 4 years.
The state's going to bond to pay,
State's
The
going to buy $10 million
reimbursements
for
for
a
this
toll
program.
study that's going to last a year.
yeah, I think.
That wouldn't pass muster in the town of
I don't
Fairfield,
think it would either.
but
Yeah, but from a town of Fairfield perspective,
Yeah.
this is probably the one shot at getting $750,000 worth of equipment for free, this specific equipment. So if we're ever going to go cameras,
Yeah.
it makes sense to do it.
So my second question for the chief, Did the police commission view this, review this,
They did.
recommend it?
They did. They reviewed it and are endorsing it.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And then when does OPM need the decision by?
I don't think they, go ahead. I'll let-
We have until December 21st to, that's when the grant ends. There's a little bit of fear in that I don't know what other agencies are coming on board in the exact same place. Right now, there's $4 million left in there. I know Hartford's coming on board at $1.8 million, and I just don't know if there's others. And you get in line when you.
Right, and that's my thing, like, I'd rather be at the front of the line when the state gives away free money.
So to Mr. Tymniak's point, what's the approval process that you envision from here through the Fairfield boards?
Well, once we pass through here, then it would obviously have to go before the Board of Finance, and then I believe it has to
RTM.
go the RTM.
Right, but if we're going to, the Board of Finance meets on September 6th?
So the key would be to get, if you all approve that and move that forward, would be to get on that September 6th meeting.
And so
then the
we'd have to get on that meeting, we'd have to do it today or have a special meeting another time with this agenda.
Yeah.
The BOF September 6th meeting, you're saying,
Yeah,
right?
because we
Okay.
meet on September 7th. I think we're the Wednesday after that meeting, if I'm,
Could I go back for 1 second? I don't mean to
Please.
interrupt, but I want to go back to Mr. Bateson's question with regards to where the industry is going. I want to be clear, yeah, technology and body cameras and in-car cameras and recording interactions with officers and residents is the trend. And I think that when I first came on, we didn't have tasers. Now officers are equipped with tasers and radios of their own. We used to share radios. Now, so as public safety changes and the challenges change, one of the things as a town we have to be prepared for are some significant investments in officers' equipment. And you have, and so I'm not saying that the town has not, because they certainly have. But body cameras and in-car cameras for documentation purposes is not going away. It's only going to be seen as more of a requirement for the protection of the officers, for the protection of the residents, and I say that globally. I don't necessarily think that our officers are very well trained and treat our residents with respect. That's not to say that we don't oftentimes get complaints from residents. In our study, I can recall in our body camera study, I can recall one instance where an officer made an arrest and the resident filed a complaint, and we were able to review that body camera, and the officer's account was upheld based upon the video. And so I don't think body cameras are going away. I think that is ultimately going to be part of the requirements needed to have a police officer equipped properly.
Who gets to choose the vendor? Is that you guys? Whatever these cameras are, is this the industry standard you're using?
Again, I'll point it back to Chris, but I know that the state police have gone with this vendor. It's Panasonic, so the significant vendors, one of them is Achiron, and Achiron is most familiar probably with the taser. That's the company that manufactures the taser.
I just want to make sure you guys are sticking with the people that own this market, you know what I mean? I don't want to go with an outside vendor, a cheaper price, all that we might have problems with.
Definitely not the cheaper price, but yeah, we're confident on the Panasonic. One of the big drivers was the fact that there's no reoccurring with this solution. And to be honest with you, our beta program is with Axon, like the chief said, that is cloud-based storage, that is basically a lease, a buy-lease type of thing, where after, in year 2, there would be reoccurring costs that I would never come before the board.
Why so many cameras? Why 80? How many guys, what do we have, 12 guys on the road at once? Why do you need 80 cameras? I mean, that would be like getting each officer a patrol car. Why wouldn't we have 20 that rotate in and out of service?
Because we could, because they would pay for that, and the hope is that I would have a reserve to get through that first year of breakage too. So we'll come close to deploying 80, but if I had 10, I have to have some in reserve, because we're mandated.
Who do you
by
envision?
policy.
The only people I would just envision patrolmen.
Yeah, so I think that
So-
So, yeah, I mean, if you looked at it just from the patrol perspective, we have, on average, in patrol officers, meaning the officers that respond to the calls, 10 on a shift with supervisors. But our school safety unit is certainly engaging and interacting. Now, our accident division, our traffic enforcement unit that deals on a daily basis with some of the interactions with motor vehicle, officers that are working road jobs in uniform, you just never really know. And if we're going to go in, I mean, we have 108 officers. This is 80 of them. And I believe we're
Okay, so
leaving-
you're saying if a guy's working a road job, he's going to have a camera on?
Well, he's going to have it on him. If he's assigned the camera, if he's assigned it, he's going to have it with him. Now, obviously, if there was an interaction, he'd turn it on. That includes some for our detective bureau, not for all detectives, but if our detectives are doing search warrants, we want to make sure that we have, again, those protections. It's important that they have.
Okay, so
those.
Chris, you're saying if, you're envisioning probably 40 people at once using the cameras. I want to double that to be safe, that I got enough.
65 with 15 in reserve. 15 if there's a temporary malfunction, I could take one out of the rack and I'm good to go. And
All
hopefully
right,
those
so now I see the
15
reason for the
carries.
80. You're saying at most, I'm going to have 65 in service at once, and I want 15 backups.
Correct.
Okay.
Could you answer Mr. Bateson's question, but about the police cars and the in-car units? How many in-car units are getting one for every car on that?
There's 60 in cars?
60 in cars, yeah.
Yeah, so we have more than 60 vehicles, but we looked at the amount of vehicles that we have that are patrol ready. I mean, in other words, that they're out on the road, given any idea of, or any action on the road, and we chose that 60 mark.
I feel ashamed that I didn't know we had over 60 vehicles in the police department. How many do we have?
You know, I think we have about 85 vehicles, and that's just off the top of my head from the last budget meeting.
Wow.
Now, keep in mind that that includes our motorcycles.
I know, I didn't know.
Yeah, and other things. Now, so there, yeah, we certainly have an extensive fleet of vehicles. You know, I
So
listed
that
off.
makes that 10 cars we buy every year a lower number, because we're only replacing a portion of that.
I had no idea we had that many.
Based on what I've heard today and the timeline, knowing that it's been endorsed by the police commission, I mean, I've seen and we've seen cases come to us in the past, the he said, she said conversations. I look at it as an opportunity to offer the officer protection and confidence that his actions are recorded and will come to protect him in the decisions he or she makes while out in the field. I agree with you, Chief, and Mr. Bates. This is the trend moving forward, and with the, I want to say, undermining of the police force across the country in certain areas, I find reprehensible, where the police officer is usually the guilty assumption first before the incident occurs. This would go a long way to protect it. And finally, Mr. Mayor convinced me with the comment of free money from the state. I'm willing to
It's
vote.
not directly charged back.
Yeah.
We're paying for it one way or the other.
I think it's ridiculous, but the state's decisions are the state's decisions. I'm happy we don't replicate those on a regular basis here at the town. So I'm comfortable voting on this tonight.
Mr. Bateson?
Yeah, two more things. I know the police commission met this morning. Was that what they met about?
They did, yes.
This,
Yeah.
and they voted to approve it?
They did, yeah.
The pilot program, the 12 units, whatever we're in the, how many years into that program are we?
2 years.
2 years. Union, rank and file, how are they doing with this? They're on board with everything you guys
Yeah.
are proposing?
Yep.
They see it as a benefit to them and their,
Yeah,
in the
they've seen,
organization?
yeah, they actually, absolutely have, and they've seen it in the pilot.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
absolutely.
okay, so the department's on board with this? Okay.
Again, building on that, as you've done 2 years of pilot, you've had 12 units out there.
Yes.
What were the big 3 takeaways? You know, what have we learned? Any surprises, anything that reinforced what you were thinking?
No, I think that as you introduce new technology, it oftentimes becomes a lot of the concerns, I think initially from officers would be that, hey, now I'm being videotaped, and how is that going to work? So I think that it wouldn't be a surprise, but I think that it's been embraced. I mean, it is what it is, and it hasn't necessarily created any earth-shattering discoveries. I mean, keep in mind that there's policies with it too, so how they use them, when they shouldn't use them, all of that on a back-end level is also there too, that we follow the state model on.
Right. Any issues with FOI and the videos?
Yeah, I think we had one FOI request for videos and in our test pilot program. We've had other FOI requests. Anytime we get freedom of information, there's oftentimes, if there's any video exists, oftentimes there's not. I think there's only been one time that there was actually video. Other than that, it would follow the same freedom of information request.
So all these are FOIable?
They are.
In essence, okay. And then any costs? Normally you're making a copy. Any additional costs that come with producing a video or providing that to somebody?
Yeah, I think the management of the videos will be through our current structure. And I don't anticipate any significant costs involved with that. And we charge for that release of that information.
Okay.
And when I say everything's FOIable, there are certain things, and it would fall under it, that will not be released. Whether or not there's juveniles involved, whether there's other privacy rights, injuries, HIPAA, or other regulations. It's not that everything is released, it's just that everything is, the request can be made, and then it has to be evaluated based upon the FOI rules.
All right, very good. Any further comments from the board? Mr. Bates?
Yeah, I don't want to micromanage the department, but you guys, who, in this grant, is training for these units covered under this grant?
Yeah, there's significant funding for initial training.
For initial training. Now, when it comes to you guys, when it comes to policing and policies, do you guys have a policy in place? Are you ready to implement this department-wide? Like, when do you turn on the camera? What procedures do we have? I mean, you know what I mean? I understand they're going to train you how to use the cameras, but if you guys developed your police policy on how you're going to implement this and use it?
3 years ago, Police Officers Training and Standard Council created a model policy. 2 years ago, when we started our pilot, we created a policy that mirrors the state policy. And it's a very...
And we're fine-tuning that as we go along? Because I imagine this is an emerging industry.
We can, but the policy was written with great latitude for the officer. So an officer can turn off his body camera in appropriate situations.
Are they being trained to when those situations occur? You know what I mean? I mean, I know, I just don't want the tape to keep running. We
Yeah.
all have bad moments.
Absolutely, absolutely.
When it comes to FOI, I'm a little curious, like, when Mike brought this up, I didn't know, I thought all police stuff was confidential. So let's say I go out and have a bad night and I get a DWI. Jenny Riley can go down and pull the tape? Wow. I didn't know that. That's the law?
Yeah, well, yeah, under freedom of information, you can request anything under freedom of information, and if there's certain qualifications that we can withhold information based upon
Wow,
an
whole new
active
world.
criminal investigation.
Guess I gotta
or
stop
other.
that. Well, Ed, they could pull the police report anyway, and whatever the
I know,
officer
but
comments
police
were, they'd have
report,
that.
you know, I'm on video, I gotta watch my language now.
Don't look good around here.
Okay.
All right, any further comments from the board?
No.
All right.
I'm ready to go.
And
You
given,
guys?
I'm ready
given
to
the
go.
timeline, it sounds like it would be best if we could take that vote today.
Yes.
Any comments from the public? Seeing none, back to the board, ready to vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thanks.
All right. Next up, item 8, to hear a report on the budget process. And again, I think we mentioned this briefly before, but the Board of Finance has suggested they want to go back to the process that's laid out in the charter. Mr. Mayor is giving us a report on a couple of different options, one that follows that, one with a couple of modifications. The charter does allow for changes to what's in the charter. It would change to what's in the charter from a process standpoint would have to be proposed by the Board of Selectmen, but then approved by the Board of Finance. So, Mr. Mayor, if you come up and step us through where we are.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. This is actually fairly straightforward. Board of Finance, the charter has a timeline for budget development. The charter also has a clause that says that that can be waived, as the first selectman just mentioned, at the recommendation of the Board of Selectmen, approved by the Board of Finance. The current, what has been the current process prior to this next coming budget year has not been in accordance with the timeline in the charter, but I'm assuming was at one point in time voted on as a waiver, so it has been in compliance with the charter.
Well, it's been voted on every year, Mr. Mayor, so it has been in
It's been
compliance.
voted on every year, if you take the implication that by voting on the schedule, you voted on it.
What we haven't done, what hasn't been done is a vote to change the charter over a multi-year process and keep the same process.
Exactly. So, so the problem with the timeline that's in the charter, let me back up. The Board of Finance's primary intent is for them to have their own hearings without the Board of Selectmen, okay? So that's number one. And to get a good document, obviously, is number one, but to be able to review that with the town bodies on their own without the participation in their meetings by the Board of Selectmen. The charter timeline does call for separate hearings, Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen first, Board of Finance second. The problem with the timeline that's in the charter is that to meet that timeline exactly, the budget that the Board of Selectmen would receive from the first selectman would have to be prepared by the first selectman prior to the date that the state budget is scheduled to be issued, and also prior to the date that the Board of Education budget is scheduled to be completed every year. So the Board of Selectmen budget would be an incomplete budget. So basically, what we did in the Finance Department was put together a schedule that does two things. It meets the intent of the Board of Finance to have their own discrete hearings, and it allows for the budget that gets to the Board of Selectmen from the first selectman to be produced after the first selectman has those two pieces of information available, so there can be a more intelligent budget. The Chris DeWitt, Board of Finance member, is the chair of the Budget Review Committee, Budget Process Committee, and he's reviewed these documents and has told me he supports them. But by being supports them, supports the Finance Department alternative.
Go ahead.
So your recommendation, existing is what we have now, you recommended option, this is,
Excuse me, existing is what we would go to now, because that's how the charter lays it out. It's
No,
not,
existing is what we've been doing.
Yeah.
existing is what we've been doing?
Existing is what we've been doing.
Yeah, I think option 2 is what the
Okay.
charter says we should do.
Option
Gotcha.
two, so the
Which is
charter
what
says-
so Bob, you want, I'm saying, you're advocating for the recommended option.
Correct, yeah, I think it makes.
Option
makes
2 is
the
what we would have to
process.
do to be in strict compliance with the charter, which you're saying is impractical, given the state budget and the BOE.
Correct,
And existing is what we do now.
correct.
Any further comments or questions from the board?
Can
I get where he's coming from. I'd like to
Yeah.
sit down and rationalize the dates and see if, see if
yeah,
just.
can I let this
That's what-
absorb for
Well,
a little bit?
that's- Now, let's be clear, this is a report. There's no action request of the board. The assumption was we'd all want to do that.
Right, okay.
Yeah, I mean, if I got two, are we meeting in 2 weeks?
No,
3 weeks?
first week in September.
Okay, I mean, if I have enough time, I mean, I'm ready to, I'll consider it then if I can talk to Bob and make sure that the Board of Finance, and just make sure that I understand how this is, and talk to you and say, okay, how's this gonna affect us, and are we gonna be sitting with the Board of Finance at the table, are we gonna be doing our own thing?
Yeah, the reason is I would roughly understand this if we go with the charter version or the other one. The charter version says that, frankly, I've got to come up with a budget and just make more estimates than would be ideal. And we're going to review that in February sometime, so,
And
So
also,
either way,
yeah.
we're kind of done by March 1st or thereabouts.
And I'd like to
in terms of
look
our
at it,
process, And the
right.
Board of Finance takes it over from there, and they would pass it off, so.
Right, and I'd like to
it's-
look at that in a context of a calendar and see what constraints it's putting us under and you under, putting together a budget.
The other piece, it just, it's going to take more time from finance to sit in on 2 sets of meetings. It's going to take more time from our department heads
Right.
to sit in on 2 sets of meetings. But other than that,
But then maybe we can put together something where we do, I don't know, maybe take a Monday, just do it Monday during a working day and get it out of the way,
Something like that.
Yeah.
That almost sounds better.
you know?
So, yeah, there's
So that
things
we're
that-
not imposing on department
but
heads.
if we can do that, let's take a look at this. If we can do that, the later we can get it done, the better information we have.
Right.
Right, so that's always the push, right? We've got to meet certain constraints to get it to everybody. But if we could do this whole thing in April, we'd have better information, and it'd be less, we wouldn't have less revisions. There's always, we sit through and go through a number of revisions of just new information that comes out.
Well, to
Maybe
me,
too much.
the Monday after the Super Bowl is a great day for this type of thing. Everybody comes, eyes wide open, ready to look at a budget.
A little too early in February for that, Mr. Tymniak, a little too early in February.
Well, option 2 here, I'm seeing February 4th through March 1st is what you're talking, Board of Selectmen conduct
Yep.
hearings on first selectmen recommendations.
And that does a few things. One, there's 3 of us, not 12. We talk less than the Board of Finance. We can probably be more efficient in terms of how we go through that.
Exactly, and I mean, if we're not stuck in that, not stuck in that forum with the Board of Finance, but if we're in that forum, I mean, this is the kind of thing where Chris and I, if we look at the budget, we can call up and say, hey, Bob, what happened in finance?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we can, Chris and I can do
Selectively
it. I mean, you're
ask.
running it, but Chris and
Yeah.
I can look at it and say, this is what I got, this is what I got.
Mhm.
We can call up the department heads, and then we can say, hey, we're ready for a one-day meet and greet with the department heads and say, we don't like this is what we're thinking, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. I like
Yeah,
that.
you've
From an
gotta be-
executive level,
here's-
I think that
here's-
works better.
here's- The issue, Ed, I think, is you got to be careful that you and Chris are not meeting with the department head together.
True.
That's an illegal public hearing.
But if I have a question,
If you personally have a question, you call away,
exactly.
right?
I think,
No, and we can be selective about who comes in based upon.
yeah, I'm not
their
gonna
concerns.
drag 30 department heads in here.
No.
I think that's been the challenge. Look,
Yeah.
Betsy Brown runs the town clerk's office. We look at that. If we're not going to, if it looks reasonably right, reasonably consistent, we don't need to have her come in, sit down, and have us tell her, we have no questions.
And then we also, then when we're done with our obligation on tendering the budget to the Board of Finance, we have the option of going to the Board of Finance as ex officio.
Correct.
We don't have to go there,
Right.
but we have the option to be there.
Yep. And we can still watch them on TV, probably.
Yeah, the alternative option requires that the Board of Selectmen submit their budget recommendation to the Board of Finance on March 14th. The Board of Selectmen will receive their budget from the first selectman on February 8th.
Is that option two?
That's the recommended option.
That's the recommended option. Okay.
So you, depending on how you want to do it, you could have hearings, you could do it the way you're discussing it. You actually have the number of work days between the time you receive it and the time you need to distribute it or issue it, release it to the Board of Finance. You have 11 business days.
Are there any school vacations in there, anything like that in February?
I didn't check on school vacation, I was just counting business days.
There's some.
We might, if we could go back and check on that, please.
Yeah, well, there's still going to be 11 business days. But yes, we can check on what it is.
Yeah, I'd like to sit down, just look at the calendar, what we've done in the past, just make sure I'm comfortable with the process, and then
Yep.
I'll be ready to act on this in September.
I will as
Okay,
well.
good, then we can get it to
Now,
the-
I'll follow up with you, Bob, and Linda, just to make sure the mechanics of the way this thing is gonna work.
Yeah, and there's nothing different between the three, among the three options until, as far as the finance department is concerned, until sometime in November, so you have time.
Well, the Board of Finance, if we vote on our next meeting, the Board of Finance wouldn't get it till October, so they'd have to make a one.
I'm saying in the finance department.
Right,
And
but
so then we do the same thing, we'll pretty much be doing the same thing. We would be impacted, we would start doing things differently
Yep.
depending on which option in November.
understand. What I'm asking is, please take a look at the approval process. If we vote on it in our first meeting in September, gets to the Board of Finance in October, if they vote on that, does that give us time to make the appropriate adjustments?
Yes. Definitely, yes,
Okay.
yes.
When do we set our calendar for next year? November?
December.
December? So we have plenty of time.
We do, we just need to be in agreement by then, because if we vote on it, we
Yeah,
have
I
to
got
agree
you.
to the next one, so.
The
All right.
board- We need to know sometime in November, we as in the finance department.
And we're gonna have to basically ask permission of the board of finance to do this, whatever we do.
However we do it, they have to, we get to suggest, they get to approve. They can't initiate, we initiate, they review and approve.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
Unless
you.
there's any more questions, thank you. All right, next up, item from the tax collector, to consider and act upon tax refunds as recommended by the tax collector in the amount of $14,504.47. May I have a motion to accept?
I'll make a motion.
A second?
Second?
All in, any,
I confirm the number, and
all right,
it's
well,
right.
okay. Anything, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And just going back, on the chief of police item, Sheila, we voted on that properly, correct?
Yes, you did.
Okay. And then item 10, to hear, consider, and act upon any other business that will properly come before this meeting, none that I'm aware of.
I'd just like to congratulate Fairfield American Little League for again winning the state of Connecticut and representing us with the same level of excellence at the New England level as we've grown to expect them to do. Unfortunately, there's no trip to Williamsport this year, but I don't think we could be prouder of the team this year in winning the state of Connecticut. So congratulations to them.
No, great point. We will be recognizing, we're planning ceremonies to recognize both the girls softball team that, for their excellence throughout the program, not just one team, but I think each team went on to win their district or state championship, as well as on the Fairfield American, Fairfield National side, a lot of the teams went through to reach sectionals and beyond on that.
It's all the age levels, yeah.
Yeah,
it
so
was very good
trying
work.
to put something together that recognizes all the teams, not just one team in doing this.
Okay, good.
All right, so stay tuned.
Yeah, great.
All right, other than that, thank you all. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Make it.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.